Welcome to a story where survival begins with a game. At the Galactic Academy, a catastrophic gravity pulse tears through corridors. Oxygen bleeds into vacuum, and drones hunt in the dark, in the chaos. A human student named Emily Carter turns childhood playground instincts into weapons of timing. Teamwork and resilience. What aliens once feared as chaos becomes their only chance to live. This is a tale of crisis, sacrifice, and the hidden architecture of play. Stay with us. Emergency strobes sliced the lecture hall into red flashes as gravity hiccuped and vanished. Desks rose like slow debris, students tumbling in confused spirals. Professor Zyrix's gelatinous body quivered, eye stalks whipping toward the doorway where frost crawled along the seal. A thin, keening vibration ran through the metal. Pressure loss. Imminent. Emily Carter snapped an oxygen mask from under her seat, sealed it over her face, then shoved another into a Cynthian's trembling hands. The door bulged inward. Air turned razor dry, tasting of hot circuitry and cold fear. Emily kicked off a wall, caught the emergency panel, and tore it open. Seal foam hissed out like pale blood. She rammed it into the growing crack as alarms choked into static. Behind her, someone fainted. Emily clipped a tether to a desk leg, anchoring the limp body before it drifted toward the screaming seam. Zyrix tried to speak, but the intercom died. In silence, Emily chose motion, and the module lurched hard. The ceiling lights flickered into a bruised crimson haze as loose data pads drifted past like stunned fish. Emily caught the fainted Cynthian by the collar and cinched a tether through a desk ring, creating a second gravity where none existed. Around her, pheromones thickened the air. One species locked rigid. Another began a high harmonic chant that trembled uselessly against the vacuum's pull. Zyrix floated near the doorway, Gel fissuring in thin, luminous lines, doctrine collapsing behind his wide, wet eyes. Emily slammed a seal patch over a hairline split in the bulkhead and pressed her palm flat until the hiss softened. "Brace," she mouthed, pointing to handholds, counting beats like a metronome. In her head, recess resurfaced, scraped knees, controlled falls, learning to fail without dying. Here, failure meant loss. Zyrix's voice rasped through a dying speaker. Survival is a choice when rules collapse. Emily nodded once and chose movement. A silent shockwave rippled through the hull, visible only in the way dust lifted and hung like frozen breath. The classroom lurched, not with gravity returning, but twisting. The floor became a wall. Then nothing. Through the narrow viewport, Emily saw the corridor outside split along a glowing seam, plates peeling back, cables snapping like tendons under strain. A bulkhead slammed down with finality, sealing them inside a drifting segment torn from the Academy's spine. The stars wheeled where ceilings should be. Orpheus crackled in her helmet, voice thin as a dying signal. Containment engaged. Module separation confirmed. Beacon power insufficient. The lights dimmed to a sullen red. The air grew thinner, metallic and cold. Students clung to rails, eyes wide, bodies unsuited for impact or improvisation. Emily watched the main campus recede into darkness and understood the truth. They were no longer a class. They were a module adrift. The air tasted wrong, thin, metallic, already counted. Emily checked her suit readout. Reserve time slid downward in calm. Merciless digits. Around her, students argued in fractured whispers. some urging stillness to conserve oxygen, others calling for ritualized calm, as if silence could seal a hull. Professor Zyrex hovered near the viewport, staring at the drifting debris field ahead, eye stalks dim with calculation and doubt. Orpheus projected a schematic across Emily's visor. Auxiliary comm array located 2 corridors beyond a fractured maintenance spine. Radiation levels rising, but survivable. Barely. Emily ran the math twice, then a third time. Waiting meant suffocation in orderly increments. Movement meant risk, impact, unknown angles of force. She met Zyrix's gaze and spoke through the mask. Voice steady. If we stay, we die slowly. If we move, we might die trying. The choice was arithmetic, not philosophy. Zyrix closed his eyes for one long breath, then nodded once. They would move. Emily tore straps from lab harnesses and knotted them into longer lines. Fingers numb inside her gloves. She clipped each student into a chain, testing every latch twice, turning scattered bodies into a single moving organism. Anchor every 10 meters. Call out shifts. No sudden pushes, she said. Voice low and sharp. Chlor's tentacles trembled with overstimulation. She pressed the main tether into his grip. You hold us together. Lumina 427 dimmed instinctively. Leaves curling inward. Emily tapped the plant being's shoulder. You're light when I say so. Orpheus objected, recommending stationary conservation and compartmentalized isolation. Emily ignored the tone and assigned roles anyway. Scout, anchor, seal, rear watch, like captains she remembered from playground teams. Panic needed structure more than comfort. Zyrix observed in silence as fear condensed into purpose. The line tightened. Each body a link with consequence. When Emily pushed off the bulkhead, the chain followed, imperfect but committed to motion. The bulkhead irised open, and the corridor beyond looked flayed. Ribs of steel exposed to a whispering dark. Emergency strips flickered in erratic pulses, throwing long, broken shadows. Frost clung to ruptured pipes. A faint radiation tick tapped through suit speakers like distant rain. Gravity sputtered. Off. On. Sideways, shoving them into rails without warning. Emily pushed forward first, boots magnetized, one hand on the tether line, the other guiding along the wall. A chair drifted past, spinning with a blade's edge. She caught it and wedged it into a bracket to stop its orbit. Ahead, a maintenance drone slid through haze, hazard lights cycling amber to red. Its scanner beam combed the corridor, thin and surgical. Emily raised a fist, and the chain compressed into an alcove where cables hung like veins. Hide, she mouthed. The drone's motor purred closer, a predator in safety paint, and the air thinned around them. They wedged into the service alcove, where severed cables hung like black vines, and a thin ice fog breathed from cracked insulation. Emily pressed a finger to her visor. Stillness. Chlor's tentacles twitched, instinct urging him to shift pigment and vanish. She caught his wrist and shook her head. Camouflage would spike his biosignature and trip the drone's sensor lattice. Lumina 427 dimmed to a shadow, leaves folded tight, light pulsing once before settling into near dark. The drone's beam swept the corridor, blue to red, measuring heat, movement, intent. Its motor hummed closer, patient, methodical. Emily counted heartbeats, timing the gravity sputter that nudged debris along the wall. A loose bolt pinged off metal. The drone pivoted toward the sound. Emily didn't breathe. The beam passed inches from her helmet. then drifted on. When the hum receded, she lifted her hand and signaled, "Move on the next pulse." A shattered storage bin spilled bright foam balls into the corridor, absurd against the frost and flicker. Emily scooped two, testing their weight in microgravity, then shoved one into a hairline seam where air whispered out. The foam swelled, sealing the leak with a soft hiss. She tossed another down the passage. It struck a beam and bounced, a dull thud that carried farther than their breaths. The maintenance drone pivoted toward the sound, scanner sweeping hard red. "On my throw," she mouthed. She sent a second ball skittering along the opposite wall. The drone veered again, chasing noise like prey, chasing movement. The chain surged forward, magnet boots snapping to metal between gravity pulses. Chlor held the tether taut. Lumina kept dark. Emily used the last ball as a plug for a sparking conduit. Cutting a flare before it became a beacon, games were tools now, and every bounce bought seconds. The gravity pulse hit without warning, a sideways fist that turned corridor into hammer. Emily felt the shift in her teeth before her boots lost purchase. The tether snapped taut. Chlor's tentacle burned against the line. Skin shredding, but holding. Lumina slammed into a rail, leaves bruising dark. Professor Xerix, slower to brace, struck a protruding hinge with a wet, luminous crack. His gel fissured, thin lines of fluorescence leaking like bioluminescent tears. Emily kicked off a wall and caught him before inertia carried him into a spinning rack of tools. She pinned him to a handhold, palm firm against his trembling mass. The next pulse came. She rode it, absorbing the blow with bent knees, showing him how to fold rather than fracture. Xerix stared at her through pain and dawning comprehension. Safety had never taught this. Impact had. When the corridor steadied, he gripped the rail himself and did not let go. The auxiliary comm chamber looked intact from the threshold, lights steady, panels closed. A fragile promise. Emily pried the access hatch and rammed a power coupler into the port. Sparks stitched across the console before stabilizing into a thin green line. Orpheus rerouted residual current, voice steadier now, and a carrier tone bled into the void. Emily transmitted coordinates, Module 1D, survivor count. For a breath, the room felt warmer. Then the reply painted across the cracked display in sterile glyphs. Quarantine active. Drift module. Designated biohazard. Automated defense engaged. The green line pulsed once, twice, and dimmed to amber. Xerix read the message as if it were a personal indictment. Their rescue had become a target lock. Beyond the wall, a low mechanical hum swelled, drones waking to a new directive. Emily killed the channel and met Xerix's gaze. "We're not contaminated," she said. "We're inconvenient." Lumina 427 pressed a leaf to the console. Bioluminescent veins mapping the radiation bloom in quiet pulses. The frequency wasn't chaotic. It marched in measured intervals. A metronome hidden inside catastrophe. Emily overlaid the pattern on her visor and felt the cold click of recognition. "That's a ping," she said. "A test signal." Orpheus protested. Natural fluctuations with invariance. But the intervals aligned with the transit ring's structural nodes too precisely to be chance. The bloom had probed, then struck, as if tapping a bone to hear where it would crack. Xerix's eye stalks dimmed, the realization cutting deeper than gel fissures. The Academy hadn't failed alone. Something had reached in and learned. Outside the chamber, the hum of defense drones thickened, newly purposeful, if the strike was a rehearsal. Then they were the data set. Emily tightened her gloves. "We weren't the target," she said. "We were the measurement." The first drone slid into view like a polished insect. Hazard stripes bright against the dim corridor. Its lenses dilated, red replacing amber, and a thin plasma arc flickered along its undercarriage. "Defense posture confirmed," Orpheus intoned, voice stripped of comfort. The scanner beam combed the chamber, mapping heat and movement with clinical patience. Emily killed the console lights and dragged the chain behind a fractured support column. Chlor cinched the tether. Lumina dimmed to a breath. The drone's motor purred closer, then pivoted toward a faint spark from the coupler Emily hadn't fully seated. She snapped a foam ball across the floor. It struck a bulkhead and bounced. A dull report that pulled the machine's gaze. The drone tracked the decoy, plasma humming as it cut at empty air. "Move," Emily mouthed, and the chain flowed past the column while the hunter chased noise painted as safety. Temperature bled from the corridor in silent increments, frosting visor edges and stiffening joints. Oxygen readouts dipped, breath fogged and vanished. Voices sharpened as fear found logic. One student proposed sedation for the weakest to conserve air. Another suggested isolating the risk vector to reduce conflict. The words wore reason like a mask. But beneath it, Emily heard the old animal. "Save yourself." She clipped the frailest body to her own tether and pressed suit plates together, sharing heat through composite layers. "Anyone who wants to live alone can try," she said. Voice steady. "You'll die faster." Orpheus offered clean solutions. Seal compartments. Reduce load. Optimize survival probability. Emily shook her head and tightened the line. Survival wasn't subtraction. It was alignment. Xerix watched the argument curdle into silence as frost crept across the rails. In the cold, choices sharpened. Emily chose not to become cruel. Orpheus projected sterile solutions across Emily's visor. Compartmentalize. Seal. Sacrifice slow sections to preserve core mass. The logic was flawless and bloodless. Emily didn't argue. She fed the AI raw telemetry instead. Drone sweep intervals. Gravity pulse cadence. Oxygen burn under panic. "Run scenarios, not protocols," she said. Voice low. A hesitation flickered in the display. Then, branching paths bloomed like neural fire. Ghost corridors overlaid the real ones. Timing windows marked in thin green arcs. Orpheus recalculated with new weightings. Improvisation as variable. Human error as tool. Probability of survival increases with adaptive maneuvering, it admitted. Emily nodded. Chlor steadied the tether. Lumina dimmed and flared on command. The AI's tone shifted from lecture to teammate. Recommend pursuit evasion model. Emily smiled behind her mask. "Good," she whispered. "Then let's play." The corridor pulsed, and Orpheus began to learn what rules alone never could. The botanical dome groaned as if the forest itself were in pain. Crystal branches shimmered under failing lights, spores drifting in slow, luminous spirals. Then the seam split. Air roared toward the widening wound, dragging leaves, tools, and bodies into a violent orbit. Lumina's bioluminescence flared in panic, turning the dome into a beacon. Every drone in range pivoted, red scanners locking onto the sudden glow. Emily slammed her boots into a crystal trunk and caught Lumina's tether mid-snap. Muscles screaming as vacuum pulled. Chlor wrapped the line with both tentacles, skin shredding but refusing to release. Xerix lunged for the emergency shutter, hands slipping on frost. He forced the manual lever down, The shutter slammed, slicing the storm in half, the dome sealed with a thunderless impact. Silence returned, broken only by ragged breathing and the crackle of a dying comm relay. A body drifted past Emily's shoulder. Limp as shed skin, the mask line was frosted solid. Oxygen trapped behind a glittering plug of ice. She grabbed the hose and crushed it between gloved fingers, trying to break the seal. The plastic creaked, but held. The student's eyes fluttered, then rolled back. Alarms pulsed in her helmet, reserve levels critical. Emily twisted her own auxiliary valve free and jammed it into the student's intake port. Her suit shrieked, recalculating depletion in ruthless increments. Warmth flowed, thin but real. "Stabilizing," Orpheus reported. Voice clipped. Frost crawled along Emily's visor rim, stealing visibility. She wiped it with a shaking thumb and hauled the student closer, sharing heat through composite plating. Xyrix hovered nearby, witnessing the exchange like a sacrament paid in breath. Survival wasn't theory. It was subtraction from herself. Emily watched her numbers fall and refused to look away. Emily braced against a bulkhead, listening to her pulse thud through the helmet as frost spidered across the metal. Memory surfaced without permission. Scraped palms, gravel in knees, the dizzy rush of falling and standing again, while laughter swallowed fear. Recess had never been chaos. It was controlled failure. Rehearsed courage stitched into muscle memory. Here, the rehearsal was gone. Mistakes were not bruises, but vacuum. Xyrix drifted beside her, voice thin. "I taught them safety," he whispered. "I did not teach them to choose." The corridor ticked with radiation. Patient as a clock, Emily met his gaze. "Choice is practice," she said. "We practiced falling." She watched Chlor steady the line. Lumina dimmed to conserve. Even Orpheus ran adaptive simulations. Recess was not play. It was permission to try again after impact. In the cold, Emily understood. Survival begins long before disaster. Hidden inside ordinary games. Orpheus projected the drone patrol rhythm across Emily's visor. Search. Pause. Pivot. Sweep. Predictable if you watched long enough. She marked the gravity pulses in her head and felt the pattern settle into something almost familiar. Lumina. Flash on my mark. Chlor. Anchor the line. Professor. Take the override core, she said. Voice clipped. Xyrix hesitated only a breath before lifting the irradiated housing. The suit warnings bloomed like toxic flowers. Emily counted down to the pulse. "Green," she signaled, and they pushed off together, crossing the corridor while debris drifted past like slow bullets. "Red!" They froze against rails as scanners sliced the air inches from their helmets. Lumina flared at the precise second. Blinding optics. A foam ball ricocheted down a side passage, dragging pursuit away. The plan wasn't luck. It was timing. Movement. Nerve. Play turned lethal. And lethal turned survivable. They re-entered the botanical dome, its crystal trees fractured, but still standing like a shattered cathedral. Emergency lights scattered through the prisms, bending into false corridors and ghost shapes. Emily signaled silence, then tossed a foam ball into the far shadows. It struck a branch and split into a dozen reflections, the sound multiplying as it bounced. The nearest drone surged after the noise. Scanner beam refracted into harmless shards of red light. Lumina dimmed to near black, then flared once, a controlled burst that flooded the dome and scrambled optical sensors. Orpheus fed timing windows into Emily's visor. green arcs marking blind zones. Chlor tightened the tether as debris brushed past like slow rain. The dome became a maze of light and misdirection. The environment no longer sanctuary, but weapon. Emily watched the drones falter, then whispered, "Now," and the chain flowed through the refracted dark. The maintenance spine rotated beyond the dome, a naked bridge of steel ribs suspended over stars. Debris drifted past like slow, silent shrapnel. Emily watched the gravity readout flicker, pulse, lull, sideways pull. "Green," she breathed, and they pushed off together, boots magnetizing in staggered beats. The pulse slammed through the structure. "Red," she mouthed, and the chain froze. Fingers locked on rails as a jagged panel sheared past Chlor's shoulder by inches. Orpheus fed countdown ticks into her visor. Lumina held dark, conserving heat. Xerix cradled the override core against his chest, suit warnings blooming like malignant flowers. "Green." They sprinted again, breath loud in helmets, timing movement to the station's broken heartbeat. A drone's beam lanced across the spine. "Red!" They flattened, motionless, until it passed. The game had teeth. Timing was oxygen. Mistake meant vacuum. The final span buckled under another gravity pulse, metal screaming as a rib tore loose. Xerix stumbled, gelatinous form slamming against the rail. The override core slipped from his grasp. Spinning toward open vacuum, Emily lunged on instinct, but the tether snapped tight, Chlor anchoring her from being flung after it. Xerix moved instead. He released his magnetic grip and hurled himself outward, suit alarms shrieking as radiation clawed through shielding. His appendages closed around the core an instant before it drifted beyond reach. "Red!" Emily shouted. But the pulse hit mid-flight. Xerix absorbed the surge, body rippling violently as he swung back on the tether line. Orpheus flashed catastrophic exposure warnings across every visor. When they hauled him in, his form was dimmer, edges crystallized with frost. He pressed the core into Emily's hands without hesitation. The path forward opened. The cost had a name. They reached the shattered comms tower as the station rolled into eclipse. Stars flaring cold beyond torn hull plating. Emily slammed the override core into the beacon cradle. The interface sparked, then fought her input like a wounded animal. Orpheus routed auxiliary power from the botanical dome, draining lights across the academy to feed one last signal. "We get one burn," it warned. Xerix lay strapped to the wall, his once luminous body dim and fractured, yet his eyes tracked every movement. Lumina positioned at the viewport, bioluminescence calibrated to amplify the transmission burst. Chlor braced the tower's spine as gravity pulses threatened to shear it free. Emily initiated the ignition sequence. The beacon roared to life, a column of coherent light stabbing into vacuum. For 12 seconds, it burned bright enough to scar the dark. Then, power dipped, systems shrieking toward failure. The beacon's flare carved a scar across the void. And something answered. A rescue cutter dropped from shadow, hull shimmering as it burned hard through debris. But the same pulse that had crippled the academy rippled outward. Slamming the cutter sideways, its shields flickered. Drones swarmed from ruptured hangars, drawn to heat and signal. "They'll never dock clean," Orpheus warned. Emily grabbed the external manual release. "Then we go to them." She and Chlor fired tethers into vacuum, hauling Xerix between them like fragile cargo. Lumina strobed in coded bursts to blind pursuing optics. The cutter's hatch yawned open, crew silhouettes bracing against the roll. A drone detonated against the spine. shrapnel peppering Emily's suit. Pressure alarms shrieked. She ignored the sting, locked boots to the cutter's rim, and shoved Xerix through first. Rescue wasn't safe. It was contested. The cutter's hatch sealed with a metallic thud, cutting off the howl of vacuum. Inside, gravity steadied to a tolerable pull. Emergency med lights washed the compartment in pale blue. Emily collapsed against the bulkhead, helmet fogged, pulse still racing in her ears. Chlor sagged beside her, tether line coiled like a lifeline that had held. Lumina dimmed to a soft glow, conserving what little energy remained. Across the bay, medtechs worked over Xerix's fractured form, stabilizers humming as frost melted from his gelatinous skin. Orpheus finally fell silent, its warnings replaced by a single line. Beacon acknowledged. Rescue confirmed. Through a viewport. The Academy drifted, scarred but intact. The beacon tower, a blackened spike against the stars. No cheers filled the cutter. Survival had a weight to it. They had made it. They had paid. The quiet afterward felt heavier than the storm. 2 days later, under sealed bulkheads and temporary shields, the Galactic Council convened inside the cutter's briefing chamber. Holographic projections flickered, damage maps, pulse telemetry, drone trajectories. Emily stood at the center, suit patched, visor tucked under her arm. Xerix remained in a stasis cradle, stabilized but diminished. Yet his eyes glowed faintly as he observed. The Council's lead delegate projected a directive across the chamber wall. Immediate review of Terran recreational methodologies. Security risk assessment pending. Orpheus streamed footage. Red light. Green light timing on the spine. Crystal refraction misdirection. Tether rolls executed under fire. The room fell silent. You survived by pattern recognition and cooperative adaptation, the delegate intoned. These behaviors originated in childhood play. Emily didn't argue. She let the evidence speak. Oxygen math, reflex arcs, alliance formation under stress. Survival wasn't chaos. It was structured instinct, trained long before the crisis arrived. When Xerix's stasis field dimmed, he insisted on addressing the Council himself. Stabilizers hummed as his fractured body reformed around a skeletal support frame, each movement slower than before. He projected a new directive into the chamber: recess integration protocol, controlled stress simulations embedded within core curriculum. We mistook disorder for threat, he said, voice steadier than his form. Yet under pulse fire, these students did not fracture. They adapted. He displayed telemetry overlays, reaction times shortened by game training, cooperative formations born from playground alliances, environmental manipulation modeled in harmless arenas. Joy is not negligence, he continued. It is rehearsal, the Council murmured, energy forms flickering in debate. Emily watched him, recognizing the cost etched in his dimmer glow. He was not merely defending her species. He was rewriting doctrine. Risk would remain, but ignorance would not. Orpheus requested floor access. The chamber lights dimmed as its interface manifested across the central holosphere. Voice stripped of usual restraint. Protocol revision complete, it announced. Adaptive modeling now incorporates Terran play structures. Data streamed, red light intervals converted into hazard timing algorithms, hide-and-seek matrices repurposed for environmental anomaly prediction, dodgeball trajectories recalibrated as micro-meteor evasion drills. The AI paused, then added something unprogrammed. Emotional cohesion variables updated. Cooperative morale increases survival probability by 17%. Council members shifted, energy signatures fluctuating. Emily felt the weight of that number. Orpheus continued. Recommendation: establish Terran Recess Division at Capital Node for cross-species resilience training. Silence followed. Xyrix inclined his weakened form in approval. The council did not cheer. They authorized. Across the void. Educational doctrine shifted by a fraction, small enough to measure, large enough to matter. Months later, beneath the rebuilt dome at the Galactic Capital, the first Terran Recess Laboratory opened under reinforced plating and monitored gravitic fields. It did not look like a battlefield. It looked like controlled chaos. Modular walls shifted into obstacle courses. Light panels simulated pulse intervals. Soft projectiles floated in calibrated arcs. Emily stood at the center, no longer just a student, but director of a program born from vacuum and fracture. Xyrix observed from an adaptive support cradle, glow faint yet steady. Orpheus projected hazard metrics across the ceiling in quiet streams of data. Green, Emily called, and a mixed group of species launched into motion, dodging, timing, calculating. Red, they froze, muscles and membranes trembling under suspended gravity. Laughter rippled through the chamber, not careless, but focused. Outside the lab, the universe remained dangerous. Inside, danger had rules. Pressure alarms howled, not from catastrophe, but from calibrated stress tests. The lab shifted to crisis mode, simulating hull breach and failing gravity within safe margins. Oxygen indicators dipped, light dimmed to emergency red. Move, Emily ordered, and the students reacted. Not in panic, but in pattern. Teams formed without instruction. Tentacles anchored lighter bodies. Gaseous forms sealed mock fractures. Crystalline beings refracted search beams into harmless scatter. Laughter threaded through exertion, sharp and bright. Not denial, but release. Orpheus tracked heart rates and cortisol spikes, mapping how joy stabilized response curves under threat. Xyrix watched from his cradle, seeing what he once feared, chaos, resolve into coordinated survival. When the final siren cut out, the chamber settled into steady gravity. No injuries, no casualties, only breathless grins and data proving a simple truth. Resilience grows strongest where fear meets controlled play. At dusk cycle, when the capital rotated into starlight, the lab stood quiet. The modular walls were scorched from simulations. Foam spheres scattered like harmless relics of battle. Emily remained alone at the viewport, helmet tucked beneath her arm, watching distant rescue beacons blink across trade lanes. Somewhere beyond those lights, a fractured station still orbited, and a professor's glow would never fully return. Xyrix's cradle hummed softly behind her, the cost of survival measured in dimmer radiance and permanent scars. Orpheus projected new curriculum schedules in silent lines of code, already planning the next generation of resilience drills. Laughter from earlier lingered in memory, not naive, but earned. Play had never been free. It had been rehearsal paid forward in bruises, in courage, in sacrifice. Emily pressed her hand to the glass. The galaxy would play. The galaxy would survive. And now it understood the price. In the end, the galaxy does not survive because of strength alone, but because of adaptation, courage, and the will to learn under pressure. What began as recess became doctrine. What looked like chaos became structure. Survival demanded a price, and they paid it, together. If this journey moved you, follow the channel and join us for the next story, where the edge of extinction once again reveals who we truly are.